Welcome into the official. We got a great show for you this week as usual, and we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to kick it to our users in the Discord. Told them we had a mailbag episode, and so we got some questions sent in, kind of ranging the gamut from all things around recruiting. So whether it's a specific player, a depth chart question, or more of a style analytical, how do you go your process question, we got it all. So stick with us. We're going to answer your questions and, hopefully give you some actionable advice and color in some of the lines on how we get to our end game, how we get to the end of our evaluation come, freshman guide season. So without further ado, this is the official. Welcome in, gents. This is a podcast for the people this week. We have sent out the bat signal. We have asked for mailbag questions, anything you want regarding recruiting, and we will answer those today. Before we get started, I have my Minnesota, I think it's 1979 National Champions hockey shirt on here from Home Field Apparel. They are our partners in this whole endeavor. And if you haven't been there before, this is really great collegiate apparel. As you can tell here, this shirt commemorating the 1979 National Championship hockey team from Minnesota. They really kind of go with that vintage look. Their shirts are very comfortable. They're very soft. And you also can get pants, hats, hoodies, a lot of different things at Home Field Apparel. Go check them out. And if you're a first-time buyer, Campus to Canton is your promo code to get 15% off your purchase. And then, of course, also go to campustocanton.com, which is our parent website, for anything you need for fantasy football from college side. Recruiting, obviously, is what we do here on this show, but there's Devy content for those who are playing in Devy leagues. There's college fantasy football specific content. And then there's content that just runs all the way from freshman season in college all the way through to the NFL. So go check that out. Monthly membership starting as low as $2.99 per month, depending on what package of tools and data and other resources you would like. Whew. All right. Without further ado, let's get into it. The first question, gentlemen, that I'm going to propose to you is a pretty straightforward player-based question. And this is Wisconsin running back room. They've got three guys coming in 2024, Dylan Jones, Darian Dupree, and Gideon Ituka. They probably are losing Braylon Allen. Ches Malusi might come back, but there could be some openings there in the Wisconsin room. Who do you guys like most out of this group? And, of course, you can abstain and say, I don't like this group at all. It's definitely a different looking running back group, would you say, from what we're accustomed to at Wisconsin. So, Matt, you can go first. What do you think of Jones, Dupree versus Ituka in terms of, are you drafting any of them in freshman drafts? Do you have any hope for them at Wisconsin in this new offense they've got?
For me, I probably wouldn't be drafting any of them right now. I know there's some differing opinions on Darian Dupree. I think Dylan Jones is probably the safest option there. I think he's probably the best actual runner. He's good between the tackles. He makes good cuts at the second level. He's probably doesn't have the athletic upside of Dupree. He's probably not as good of a receiver. And then Gideon Ituka, he's probably not gonna have as big of a role. He's like a little bowling ball back that's probably just gonna be like a grinder at the next level.
David, any different thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately they probably eat into each other, unfortunately. I mean, this isn't I kind of like the Longo system. They play pretty fast. They run a lot of plays. I just think that it's not like Javonte Williams, Michael Carter. They're not on that level talent-wise, but I do like Dylan Jones. Like, yeah, he's not like a size speed guy or anything. So like as far as like NFL, probably not. But he is really good between the tackles. And I kind of like these guys that are just dogs. Like he's like a wrestler. I think he's like 190. Like, I don't know. I was reading the 24/7 bio on him. They think he can get to like 210 based on his frame. I don't know. Maybe. It seems like a little bit of a stretch, but he plays bigger than his size regardless. And like Dupree is just like, I thought he was one of the more natural pass catchers, but like these are guys, I don't think they're going to be like every week starters or anything. So it's like, you kind of got to play the matchup type guys, which is, I don't know. I don't know how valuable that will be, but as far as talent, I think they're pretty good.
Okay, that sounds good. I think we can unpack this a little more just because the offense is so different. Longo, what they're bringing to the table, what we're used to at Wisconsin with 230, 40-pound running backs getting 50 carries a game. You mentioned in our chat, David, that Braylon Allen's 8th in the country in running back targets. Like, that's not what we're used to seeing at Wisconsin. Longo he's not doing very well with those targets. However, they're there. And, we expected that from this Longo offense. I mean, Michael Carter caught a ton of passes. Not Omarion Hampton. Javonte Williams caught passes when he had his big year, and they were like 1-2 punch at UNC. And so I think it's really interesting to think about these backs. The Jones and Dupree are both like 180, 190. And Dupree, can tops out over 21 miles per hour. Seems like you guys like Jones a little bit better as a runner. Neither one of those guys, at least per max preps, have caught at all. I mean, 6 catches, I think, for Dupree and like 2 for Jones. So, can they do it? I don't know, but they haven't shown it. And then you've got, I agree, Matt, the bowling ball Ituka, who's like 220 pounds, 5'9", 5'10". So probably a specific role that is not that, that's who we would normally expect at Wisconsin. But I think in the new offense, that's not really what they're trying to do.
I hope he bounces to G5. I think he could be a pretty good back there.
Okay. All right. So keep an eye out for maybe they have some attrition. I mean, do they really need to add 3 running backs this class? I don't know. So there's your answer. The answer is a little bit of we don't know, but safe to say we like the 2 smaller running backs better than the bigger running back, which is normally what you would think of at Wisconsin. I think the pass catching could separate one of them once we see them on the field and we hear things maybe in spring practice. Because they want to throw the ball to running backs. I mean, they did it at UNC when Longo was there, and they're doing it now, even though Braylon Allen, I think, David, you said he's got, 50 yards on 16 receptions, which almost feels impossible. So not doing a lot, but they're throwing it to the running backs, which we like to see for fantasy. So, I mean, keep an eye out. I mean, it's not that you want to ignore this because if one of them does pop, if one of them is good or separates himself in spring practice, Jones and Dupree are 2 guys to look for and keep an eye out. But as of right now, I don't think we have a definitive answer there. Okay. So the next question was about strength of schedule. This is something we talk about quite a bit here on the show. We use the max prep strength of schedule to kind of another piece of the puzzle. We're not completely ruling guys out unless it's really bad. David brought up a nice kind of, not really a stat, but he mentioned that certain players, I think it was receivers with like a negative SOS really don't seem to pop at the next level, something like that. Is that right, David? Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, I think it was the non-year 1 zeros. All of them had a SOS above 0, I think.
Okay, so if you have a negative SOS as a wide receiver, history says, at least from what we can see, you're likely destined for year 1 0, which has its own snowball effect for the rest of your Devy dynasty value. So it's worth noting, but it's a piece of the puzzle. Anyway, to the point of the question was the QBs in this class. What are their strength of schedule? Who's doing what against what competition? So we'll just bring it up and talk over the graphic here. Sorry, Matt, I think you're going to get blocked out by this graphic. So flanked by me and David here. And Matt, you made the graphic, so appreciate that. Sorry to block you out. So higher is better. And this is the strength of schedule we've got for the top quarterbacks in this class. You can see the outliers are CJ Carr headed to Notre Dame, and then Ryan Puglisi headed to Georgia with negative strength of schedule. You've got the two high end, Elijah Brown playing out in California, Michael Van Buren playing, I believe, on the in the Northeast, but somehow it's a
St.
great strength of
Francis
schedule.
Academy.
St. Francis Academy, which is kind of a nationally known program there. And then a lot in the middle, Trevor Jackson, 45.5 in Central Florida, Aaron Noland in Georgia, 38.7, and Dylan Raiola playing for Buford now with a pretty good strength of schedule. And we've talked a little bit about that transition for him. He didn't just come out gangbusters, really. I mean, he's been a little bit more subdued this season so far playing in that system. So, Matt, what are your takeaways here from this list? Is there anything here that changes your opinion on these guys?
I mean, not really. I mean, we've kind of known about these for, year over year, they're relatively stable unless a guy is, transferring out to a different school. I think Michael Hawkins is probably a good example of that. Some we don't have here. I just did 24/7's composite top 20 quarterbacks, and he just missed out on that. But he's somebody who moved down in competition. I don't think we really had anybody big move up. Pretty stable. But yeah, I mean, if it's just good to help contextualize their overall stats, especially if you're just looking at like the Max Preps quarterback ranking, and then or rating, and then just looking at the SOS and like, CJ Carr negative 7.5, he should be having dominant numbers against this level of competition, versus someone like Elijah Brown, who I'm not exactly high on, but at least you can excuse, if he did have poor stats, you could excuse that away a little bit more because, he is playing the best of the best.
Yeah, and the exact question was, how much does strength of schedule factor into these huge numbers we see guys putting up the QB position? And I would say for us, we talk about this as a piece of the puzzle, and I would say we're not too worried about it. As you can see, I think this is something that might matter on the extremes, but for the most part, we're not that worried. I think we don't have him listed here, but one guy that David brought up is Isaac Wilson out in Utah, just putting up obscene numbers. But that system, that whatever Corner Canyon's doing, is just doing that year in and year out. So, I think the outliers, like Corner Canyon's probably an outlier in terms of their system, plug and play, any QB. And then Puglisi here, CJ Carr, maybe you raise an eyebrow, but for the most part, and I'm not that worried. And if a guy's playing really good competition, I'm not going to bump him up. Oh, he did it against good high school competition. Like, I'm probably not going to do much for Van Buren there just because he's got a tough SOS. David, any thoughts on that, or kind of that's how you look at it too?
Yeah, I look at that similarly. I think if you have a really bad SOS and you're not dominating, it's kind of a red flag for me. But I think, like, especially with Damon Williams there, you saw his SOS was 30. I think what he's doing statistically this year, it definitely jumps out to me because like 30 is above average. It's solid. He has 13 incompletions and 17 passing touchdowns right now. He's completing 85% of his passes. He doesn't have any stud receivers that I looked at that are expected to play FBS football. I don't think so. Like, and conversely, you got like Jaden Davis. Doesn't play good competition. He's in North Carolina, right? Because I had a theory that
I believe so. Yep.
Yeah, I had a theory that all the stats in North Carolina were just like fake. I don't know. They all seem really bloated for some reason. And like,
I agree.
He's thrown to three P5 players too. So it's just like his numbers are obviously, they jump out. Yards per attempt looks super high. I think he has 17 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 76 completion percentage. So it's just like, I think just the SOS just helps bring context. Just kind of look at who they're throwing to, but really just like hone in on what they're actually doing. I mean, when we watch film, you just want to, like, does this translate type thing? So
yeah, no, couldn't agree more there. All right. So then we have a few other questions here. And this is less about specific players and a little bit more about philosophy on recruiting, on evaluating these players. We'll start with, what does a bad size and speed player have to do to overcome that bad, those bad athletic measurements? And we're usually talking, like weight and MPH for us. I mean, those are the two things we really look at, kind of the building blocks of a prospect profile, like the first foundation, at least for running backs, especially. And so what would a guy have to overcome to be considered? I think this is a timely question because of what Kyron Williams is doing right now in the NFL for the Rams. He played at Notre Dame. He was good, kind of a pass catching back. We knew he was small. Then he tested poorly at the combine, so he's small, but at least he's slow. And, then sat for a year. And then the Rams were like, hey, we really like this guy. Got rid of Cam Akers, and he's basically their bell cow. Remains to be seen if he'll be a bell cow for years to come. But he's catching passes, he's getting all the carries, and he has overcome the bad size speed combo. So, I'll throw it to Matt first. Like, is there something that you would see or some context there that you'd say, I'll give this guy more of a chance when they don't meet some of those thresholds that we like to see for the elites?
Yeah, well, it comes to NFL upsides from a high school prospect. I'm probably not going to be the one to bet on an outlier like that. Even when these non-athletes do hit at running back, at least, I'm talking specifically running back here. It's wide receiver, it'd have a pretty different, the criteria. For running back, pretty much every franchise workhorse back you see is a 70th plus percentile athlete at least. There really aren't many that are below that, especially someone like Kyron, which I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I imagine it's pretty bad, sub 50.
I think it was bad. I think it was I think he ran like a 4.5 or 4.6, 4.7 40 at 200 pounds and small and just.
But I mean, he was a great productive college player as well. So it's just showing that they do have the actual positional skills and good receiving ability as well. So it can be overcome, but it's just not the type of player that I'm going to bet on unless they're just such a juicy CFF target.
Yeah, I pulled up his combine here, 5'9", 194. So he was short and under 200 pounds, which we like our incoming freshmen to be over that weight. And then 4.65 40, 1.62 10-yard split. Vertical jump was 32. Broad jump was sub 10, 9 feet 8 inches. I mean, he didn't show anything, and he was small and unathletic. So, I mean, yeah, but I think you're talking about a diamond in the rough, and he may not even last more than a year or two. So I agree. There's really no point in hoping for this. He's got opportunity, though. And so if a guy's going to have opportunity, which segues into kind of what I was thinking, if the scheme and depth chart lines up perfectly, even if you just don't think a guy is that great, and it's a little harder with freshmen because you've got the transfer portal and a lot can change. But if you're looking at a guy and you're just like, man, the scheme is great, and maybe he does one thing well for the scheme, like he catches passes, and they're going to throw to that running back, and the depth chart looks super weak, you could bet on a guy because you're like, I think there's going to be opportunity there. But, no schemes are really ideal for unathletic guys. So it's still just kind of like, it would be a rare case that I would chase that. And, even so, what's the real reward? I'm not sure I'm into doing that to maybe get the 1 in a million guy who makes it all the way to the NFL. David, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think from an NFL standpoint, it's really tough. From a college side, there's cases. I mean, Muhammad Ibrahim comes to my mind. He ended up being 5'7", 5'8". He was barely over 200, and
he was way small. I mean, I never watched him play, but I could have sworn he was like a big bruiser, and then he was tiny.
Yeah, he's like a small bruiser. He wasn't. I don't know. He just had a low center of gravity and had exceptional contact balance that made up for his inadequacies as an athlete. So Yeah, and the system, obviously Minnesota, they're obsessed with running the ball, so it's like you just have to have that nice fit. It's slippery, but it can work, I think, more so on college side.
I like that. One thing I was thinking, if you could incorporate some kind of like, alternate types of metrics. We've looked at VOE for quarterbacks. We've looked at release time. We can't measure release time, but I know breakaway data does. And sometimes those guys kind of pop with interesting things you're not going to be able to measure on the field. Obviously, we're transitioning into a different position group. But, for running backs or receivers, like if you could measure like acceleration point A to point B, I know that's another thing breakaway data does. Like how like deceleration from, to get to a point and make a turn, a cut, whatever. But that takes some high level measuring. I don't think we're at the point where we can like really have a baseline for that and what's good and what's bad and that kind of stuff. But that would be something that you could consider other than, your top speed MPH and, size. But I think for running backs, man, I still think for running backs, it's just size, speed, for the most part. Those are your building blocks. And after that, you can kind of chip away at your prospect profile. Receiver, I agree with Matt. He mentioned it earlier. It is kind of a different position. I'm looking at different things. Okay. What traits? I'm going to throw this to David first, so he gets a chance to answer one of these questions first. What traits are impossible to improve upon? Obviously, there's a caveat there, impossible, never say never. But for the most part, what traits are you looking at? You're like, this is who he is already at 18 years old, versus maybe throw out, if you have an idea off the top of your head, of ones that you think can be improved upon in college and at the next level.
Yeah, the first one that came to my mind was just physicality in general. And it's something I hadn't really realized until like the more and more I like studied players and stuff. Like I don't think someone all of a sudden becomes like a dog. I think it's like a mentality, a personality type. So like if a guy just doesn't show physicality on tape as a high schooler, I mean, that's kind of who he is. And I just think you probably got to move on and just not just, I don't know how you can assume it's going to get better for him in that regard. And football is very physical, so it's like it's a pretty big trait that's necessary. As far as like some other one, I don't know. You guys, I won't tell. That's like the main one I want to talk about. You guys can touch on the other ones.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I know you mentioned that in the chat, Matt. Anything that you're like, this ain't changing? He is what he is at this point.
I mean, I'm a bit more optimistic, I'd say. I mean, you're not gonna be able to change your length, really. You're not gonna get any taller or longer. Guys change their bodies pretty rapidly, in sense of weight, though. But no, I mean, I guess mentality, just the way you're wired. That's just kind of something you're stuck with. You are who you are. Outside of that, I think everything else is pretty. It's up to the grabs. It's variable.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, size and speed, we have run the numbers a few different times, I think, at Campus to Canton, looking at like, your senior high school weight and your NFL draft combine weight. We can expect some increases, but for the most part, like you can't dream up a guy who's 180 and say, well, I think he can get to 215. I mean, that just doesn't really happen. I mean, very rarely, sometimes guys grow 2 inches and put on crazy amounts of weight. But for the most part, you're talking 10 pounds, 10, 12 pounds of good weight. So I would say that like that's why we do harp a little bit on that weight and size, even as seniors, because it will change a little bit, but it won't change very much. There's always outliers, but for the most part, that's not changing. One thing I put, and this probably could be improved upon. I haven't really done any studies around it or anything like that, but kind of the body control idea. We've talked a little bit about watching tape and seeing guys who are kind of like, just kind of their arms are always like waving around. They don't seem to make sharp cuts. They make moves, but it's very chaotic when we watch them. And I think that generally doesn't seem to change. And so I don't know if it's a style or if it's just body control, just being able to like really be, efficient and quick and sharp with your movements rather than, having to wave your arm around when you're trying to cut or whatever. But that's just a thought I had. I mean, I don't have any scientific real things. I think the size is big, and I do think mentality is a good one too. If you see a guy on tape that just seems to give up on plays or, whatever, I think that's a good point. Okay. How about, and this is similar, maybe in concept, does peaking in high school really happen? Are we worried about certain guys who, matured early and maybe have peaked as juniors in high school or seniors in high school? And you're like, they're probably not going to get any better. I'm fading them because of that. I mean, is that happening to you guys at all? Matt, you can go first.
I wouldn't say they've peaked, but certain guys obviously don't have as much growth potential as others. I would say, everyone's going to become a better athlete in college. Everyone's going to get more refined. Everyone's going to become a smarter player for the most part. So I think pretty much everybody is going to get better in pretty much every aspect in college. They're just not going to be able to show it like they did in high school. And statistically speaking, their numbers, they will peak in high school for the most part as well.
Yeah.
But in terms of being a talent, as a football player, I think guys are always getting better, whether we see it or not.
Okay, David, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think everyone does get better to some degree. It's surprising if you don't get bigger, stronger, faster in a college weight room, stuff like that. I think the thing is you need to get better. You need to get more better relative to your peers, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
So some guys might be more, like I always talk about, like a sort of a developmental scale, and some guys are kind of closer to their finished product as other guys, and some guys are catching up, and it's like, okay, so how does one guy pass another guy? So you always have internal competition at, say, like running back depth chart, stuff like that. So it's just like, how good are they now entering college, and how much better do you think they can get, and what are the reasons why, and kind of just study that stuff. And I don't know, and then just there's a lot of guesswork involved too, so it's kind of hard.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about relative to your peers. If everyone's getting better, who's going to get more better? That's a good way to say it. I mean, and leapfrog, essentially. You're talking about someone who's going to leapfrog somebody by kind of shooting up better. And I think one thing you've talked about, David, and I really like the idea of guys who, maybe have played the same position and specialized since 8th grade, since 6th grade, since Pee Wee football, versus guys who we hear about like, oh, they were playing, basketball or baseball or something else, and they told him, hey, you should go play football as a sophomore or junior in high school, and then we're seeing them now as prospects. It makes sense that those guys, not even physically, but just understanding the game, nuance, technique, things like that, they may not be maxed out. They may have a lot more room to grow. I think physically, I'm not worried. If a guy's huge as a sophomore, I mean, that's great. Usually those guys go on to be good. I mean, we are not worried about that. If you're huge in high school, that's usually a good thing for this type of thing, because you're talking about a longer aging curve. You're not like, oh, they're going to be out of the NFL by 35. I don't care. I mean, you still have a great NFL career. So I don't think I'm worried about that. But in terms of size, but I do think it's interesting to consider guys who maybe started later playing the game. They may have more room to grow. I have this is like totally weird, but I have toyed, like, I've wondered when you see a guy's profile picture and he kind of just like looks young, but they're already big, they're already producing, they're already a good football player. I do wonder, is like, are they gonna like mature more, get even bigger than guys who already look like they're 35? So I don't know, that no scientific data there, but sometimes when guys look kind of young, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if they're like still, maturing, and have a capacity to get even bigger muscularly and put on more weight and all that kind of stuff. But nothing to back that up. All right, and then let's just do a quick roundtable. We can start with you, Matt. Archetypes to avoid. Anything come to mind for you? Just take it away. I mean, whatever position, anything that you're like, I pretty much am always going to fade this type of player.
Yeah. For wide receivers particularly, I've always not liked guys that just can't do anything after the catch. That kind of irks me a bit. I think really the direction I've been going with wide receivers though is that even at the high school level, if you don't show some level of being decently refined, it's just you just probably never are going to be. That's just I mean David and I have been looking at a lot, and that's just something we've see over and over again. These guys, if you're super raw coming into college, it's not very often these guys come out of college suddenly being this, route running freak that's just gonna, create crazy separation. It's just, guys are going to stay in their archetypes pretty much through high school and college. That's just how it is. It's very rare that somebody will just suddenly become a new player.
I think that's pretty actionable for a lot of us who play this game. I know for so long I chased the next Calvin Johnson. For so long we were obsessed with what is it, height adjusted speed score or whatever. I mean, whatever. I remember the RotoViz when they basically said, BMI, all this stuff about receivers basically needing to be big. And so we're just chasing this. And a lot of times those guys are raw. They're winning in high school by just being physically dominant. But, that's interesting but there's been so many busts. There's been so
It's
many
even looking
never...
like, a few. I was very on Cordell Russell last class. I was pretty high on Jerry Dickey, Hakeem Williams. All of them are looking like duds right now. I mean,
that is true. Dickey was a surprise one because I like Dickey. The other two I was a little lower on, but I came around on Russell. I never liked Hakeem Williams that much, but yeah, they're all heading towards year 1-0 at this point, which is not good. David, archetype to avoid. And let's just, we can leave out like small, slow running backs.
Stole the easy one here.
No, that's definitely something I've noticed for sure. Like I'm starting to like some of these small route runners way more than I would have in the past. But as far as like quarterbacks, I guess like not mobile and also has a noodle. Like if you're a pocket passer and like, if you're a pocket passer, like, you don't have to be like a good runner or anything. Like, but if you're like kind of light on your feet and you can move around and slide around and throw off platforms, stuff like that. And you have a good arm, like fine, I'm good with that. But like, if you're not athletic and you have a noodle, I'm just like, I don't know. I don't think it's going to work.
That's not great. That's not a great combo. Well, you picked the one I was probably going to go with, like big old pocket passer. I honestly don't care that much, even if you have a strong arm. I'm kind of out on just like guys who can't dual threat. And mostly it's because like I can't tell if they're an elite processor. I think you have to be an elite processor if you're a pocket passer to be great at fantasy scoring. You have to put up insane numbers if you can't do anything on the ground. And I can't tell if you're a great processor from what I'm looking at on this side in high school. I don't trust myself for that. So that's one thing. But I think that is an area for growth, we should say, as an evaluator for me. I would also say tight ends that aren't dogs. We know this. I've talked about it. Tight ends that aren't dogs. You don't have to play hand in the dirt, blocking every down. But if I don't see you do anything, like put a guy into the dirt, block, be versatile, and you're only lining up outside, I'm a little bit nervous if you're not playing a little bit like a dog at tight end. So that's a little bit for me. And then the last question, I think, is how to be a better film watcher. I think this is something we've all learned a lot about over the last 3 years. And so what have you guys learned? Well, I mean, this question does come up from time to time with mailbags, and I think there's always probably something new to kind of mention. David, we'll go to you first, and then Matt, and I'll follow up at the end. What can you do to be a better film watcher?
I mean, like most things, like you get better just by doing it. Like just watch a lot of film. I think you can learn quite a bit on your own. You just start to pick up on patterns, pick up on little things like, oh, okay. And a lot of times you're creating a narrative to why a certain guy didn't. You never really know exactly why someone didn't pan out or whatever, but like I feel like you have a decent idea. But then there's just like so many free resources. A big one for me for receivers, because I've come a long way. I feel like with receivers, I had a lot of bad receiver takes over the last couple of years, and first down training, it was a good, actually, I think Matt, you told me about that one. They have just a lot of instructional videos and stuff like that. So I kind of know what to look for, kind of get inside the brain of a receiver, what they should and shouldn't be doing. So stuff like that. But yeah, I think the best thing is just to watch as much as you can.
Tall order for everyone out there. Matt, what do you got?
Yeah, down to that, I would say don't trust the highlights as well. As I've gotten more and more into watching the full games of these guys, it's just, you can see a very different version of the player through the highlights versus, a full game tape, which everyone knows this at this point. But, with high school, there's just, I guess, this level of acceptance where it's like, it's okay, just to watch their highlights.
That's all we have.
It's hard to find. Well, it's not, but for the most cases, unless you pay for the services or go and find the tape yourself, then yeah, that's all you have. But yeah, I mean, it's just such a big difference, and I think that's really what sets apart what we're kind of doing here now. With
out of curiosity, is there a position that you think the full game tape really eliminates
wide receiver and quarterback for sure? I think those are two of the more difficult positions to evaluate in general because it just relies on their level of refinement so much more. What they're doing, how they're winning, what their competition is. I think all those aspects matter a lot more for quarterback and wide receiver versus running back and tight end, where you can still out athlete people when you're in college and in the NFL at those positions.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, I think we've done a really nice job. I was talking to Austin about it the other day. I mean, I think we've done a really nice job of identifying running backs over the course of our time here, especially even relative to the services. Like we've really done nice finding gems, lower rated 3-star guys that really become legitimate impact players. Even doing this for a short time, only about 2 or 3 years. I think we're still working on receiver and still working on quarterback like everyone else, but I feel like we've done a nice job on running back. So the one thing I would say for me, kind of piggybacking off what David said, like watch a lot of film, but also watch, you're probably watching NFL anyway, or college. What do those guys look like? And for me, the body control aspect and like just seeing the guys at the highest level, for the most part, are so crisp with their movements, whether it's a running back, a receiver, even a quarterback. Like these guys are not flailing around. They're decisive. And maybe it's not even body control. I call it body control, but maybe it's just decisiveness. Like they know what they want to do. They have a plan. They see the field. This is all kind of like instinct. Call it what you want. But when you watch guys at the other levels and then you watch high school players, it's very clear sometimes like, oh, this guy looks like a high school player. And then sometimes it's like, this guy looks like the guys I'm already watching on Saturday and Sunday. I mean, just the way he moves. And it is hard to quantify that. But the more you watch, the more you get comfortable with what you're looking at, the difference between high school, college, and NFL. I just think you kind of get a sense of this looks like a player that's going to carry over all of the stats they're putting up, the metrics they're putting in the weight room, and on the field, they look like a guy who we watch on these other, days. So yeah, David, you got
just a couple more notes as far that I didn't think of. Yeah. So like for better or worse, I do love to make comps. I'll kind of come up with like a range of comps, like of guys they remind me of, and I'll actually just go back. Like I'm always going back and watching older players, how they looked in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I remember like, of course, I'm a Notre Dame fan, so I'm like hoping that we get our next star. I remember looking at like Tobias Merriweather. I'm like, dang, this guy's like built like T. Higgins. Like he's pretty fast. He moves pretty well. Like he looks decent on breaking routes. And I'm just like, all right, he has like, I went back and I watched T. Higgins. I'm like, no, it's not even close. Like he's way better. It's not even, and Tobias is like way softer and not physical. He's got vines for arms, doesn't use his length at all, like not catching away from his body and stuff. So I'm always going back. I'm always looking at him, and that's why I'm just like, ugh, this guy's kind of like mediocre a little bit. But I think like if most people just have time to watch highlights, and obviously there's nothing wrong with that. Like we all do it. I think, yeah, they all look good, obviously, but I think you have to like continually remind yourself of what you're not seeing.
Mm-hmm.
That's like something where I trapped myself. I'm like, okay, like this guy's a boss. Like, look at all these plays. Like, look at all the stuff he can do. And I was never really like questioning like all the stuff I didn't see.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's pretty important too, because like those are their best plays. They're all right there for you, and it's like, you know, so that's kind of
Which I think it helps us, we have a grading template. So it does force us to go through all the different categories. And then you can realize like, man, I did not see any yards after catch. That happened to me with Nye Carr. Like I really liked him. I watched the film. You kind of get into it. You're like, this guy's good. And you go through your grading template and you're like, oh man, I really didn't, now that I'm thinking about it, there was like no yak. I mean, he's kind of clumsy with the ball in his hand, kind of falls down, gets taken down. He's not making moves. He's not creative. I know Matt said he really likes yak. We all do. And so it caused me to be a little bit cautious of Nye Carr. Not that he's a bad player, but if you get wrapped up in the highlights of things like you said, I mean, you can kind of forget what am I not seeing. So, for everyone out there who's asking the question, who's interested in being a better film watcher, great. Have a little template for yourself. Make sure you're checking off that. Did I look for X, Y, and Z? And don't just get caught up in the highlights and be like, well, he's really good at this one thing and I like him a lot. So I think that's a good lesson, David, for all of us.
I
Matt,
can throw in one more here too, yeah. Especially, I mean, we're going off on wide receivers, but another point with wide receivers, going and finding their tape, camp tapes in the offseason, 1v1s and 7v7s, I think can tell you a lot about that player, particularly about how refined they are, how good at separating they are, how they plan on winning at the next level.
Yeah, and usually the camera angle is really good on those too, so you can see the player up close rather than grainy from the top of the bleachers. So good point there. All right, guys, thanks. That was great. I like the mailbag. We kind of threw it together last few days, but I think it ended up being some really nice talking points. Hopefully our listeners took home some good nuggets, and we'll do it again next week. This has been The Official.